Welcome to the CEDH Summer Slam, presented by Mayhem Comics and Collectibles. For this week, let's finish off round 1 and get a lightning-fast round 2 game in there for good measure. With that being said, let's check out the first pod today.
I brought Queen Marchesa. It is basically a take on Mad Farm, which is a very good CEDH deck. It wins through a couple loops, mostly Salvagers combo and Breach lines.
I brought Lathril, Blade of the Elves. It's a Golgari elf ball deck. It usually wins through going infinite with cards like Cloudstone Curio, Kyrian Ranger, and Wirewood Symbiote. It also has a beatdown finish with cards like Azuri, Renegade Leader, and Craterhoof Behemoth.
I decided to build Tivit. It seems like a solid list. Having a one-card combo with Tivit is pretty nice. With the testing I've done so far, it seems really solid as long as I can land Tivit in a decent amount of time.
So I brought Lord Windgrace. The deck is called Graceland. It is kind of a Windgrace, kind of just a Jund control deck. It aims to slam a Trinisphere or a Nether Void, and then just kind of accrue value through Windgrace. It can then also either win through Witherbloom Apprentice, Chain of Smog, or Ruakthar, Smash Face.
And now, with each pilot in their respective corner of the screen, let's continue the CEDH Summer Slam. And for those of you in the Ames area, stick around to find out how you can get 10% off your next Mayhem Ames purchase. Kalen draws, plays a Wooded Foothills for turn, and passes. Craft draws and puts a Watery Grave into play untapped, paying 2 life. He plays a Mox Diamond, discarding a land as it enters, and passes. Pilch draws, plays a Verdant Catacombs, and passes. Aiden draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs of their own, cracking it, paying a life, fetching up a scrub land onto the battlefield, and casting a Serra Ascendant. In response, Craft pays 2 life to cast Mental Misstep, countering Serra Ascendant. At the end of Aiden's turn, Kalen cracks Wooded Foothills, paying a life and fetching up an Overgrown Tomb onto the battlefield tapped. The turn moves to Kalen. Kalen draws, plays a Forest, and plays an Eladamri, Lord of Leaves. Kalen passes. Craft draws and plays a Grafdigger's Cage. At the end of Craft's turn, Pilch cracks his Verdant Catacombs, paying a life and fetching up a Blood Crypt onto the battlefield tapped. The turn moves to Pilch. Pilch draws and plays a Windswept Heath, cracking it, paying a life, and fetching up a Taiga onto the battlefield. He casts 3 Wishes, fetching up a Stomping Ground onto the battlefield tapped, and passes. Aiden draws and plays an Arid Mesa, cracking it, paying a life, and fetching up a Plateau onto the battlefield. They cast Walking Ballista, where X equals 1, and pass. Kalen draws and plays a Swamp. He plays an Elvish Harbinger, fetching up a Priest of Titania to the top of his library. He moves to combat, attacking Aiden with Eladamri. Aiden takes the hit, and Kalen passes. Craft draws, sighs, and passes. Pilch draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He casts his commander, Lord Windgrace, and upticks him, discarding a land and drawing 2 cards. Pilch passes. Aiden draws and plays a Swamp. They cast Rite of Flame, adding 2 red to help cast their commander, Queen Marchesa. It enters, and Aiden becomes the Monarch. Aiden passes and draws through the Monarch. Kalen draws and plays a Homeward Path. He casts an Arbor Elf and his commander, Lathril, Blade of the Elves. He moves to combat and attacks Windgrace with Eladamri. Windgrace takes the hit, and Kalen passes. Craft draws and plays a Soul Ring. Wishing for lands, Craft passes. Pilch draws and upticks Windgrace, discarding a land and drawing 2 cards. He plays a Misty Rainforest, cracking it, paying a life, fetching up a Bayou onto the battlefield. He casts Praetor's Grasp, targeting Aiden, fetching up a card from Aiden's deck, exiling it face down, and passing. Aiden draws and puts a Blood Crypt into play untapped, paying 2 life. He plays Auriok Salvagers, draws through the Monarchy, and passes. Kalen draws and plays a Priest of Titania. He casts Survival of the Fittest. In response, Craft casts Swan Song, countering Survival and giving Kalen a 2/2 bird token. He moves to combat and attacks Craft with Lathril and Windgrace with Eladamri. Both take the hits, and Kalen creates 2 1/1 elves through Lathril and passes. Craft draws, plays a Gemstone Caverns, and passes. Pilch draws and upticks Windgrace, discarding an Obliterate and drawing a card. He plays a Gemstone Caverns of his own and casts Eternal Witness, returning Obliterate to his hand, and casts Aiden's Demonic Tutor, fetching up a card into his hand. With the table on high alert, Pilch passes. Aiden draws and plays a Praetor's Grasp of their own, fetching up a card from Craft's deck and exiling it face down. They cast Fragmentize, targeting Craft's Mox Diamond. In response, Craft casts March of Otherworldly Light, exiling Auriok Salvagers, and his Mox Diamond is destroyed. Plans thwarted, Aiden removes a counter from Walking Ballista, killing Eternal Witness, and moves to combat, attacking Pilch with Marchesa. Pilch takes the hit, Aiden draws through the Monarchy, and passes. Kalen draws and casts Diabolic Intent, sacrificing the bird token, fetching up a card into his hand. He follows it up with a Craterhoof Behemoth. It resolves and gives his creatures +8/+8 and trample. He moves to combat and attacks Aiden with Lathril, Craft with Craterhoof, and Pilch with Eladamri, Harbinger, Arbor Elf, and 2 Elf tokens. Everyone takes the hit, Kalen creates 10 Elf tokens through Lathril and becomes the Monarch, and Pilch dies. Kalen draws through the Monarchy and passes. Craft draws, waits for death, and passes. At the beginning of their upkeep, Aiden creates a 1/1 Assassin token through Marchesa. They draw and play a Lotus Petal, move to combat, and attack Kalen with Marchesa and her Assassin. Kalen chumps with tokens, and in their second main phase, Aiden casts Craft's Demonic Consultation, naming Dam. They exile the top 6, then exile until they find and overload Dam, destroying all creatures and passing. Kalen draws, plays a Guardian Project, draws through the Monarchy, and passes. Craft draws, begs for release, and passes. Aiden draws and casts Reign of Filth, sacrificing most of their lands to recast their commander, Queen Marchesa. It enters, Aiden regains the Monarchy, attacks Kalen for 3, draws through the Monarchy, and passes. Kalen draws and plays a Selvala, Heart of the Wilds, drawing through Guardian Project, and plays a Marsh Flats, cracking it, paying a life, and fetching up a Bayou onto the battlefield. He plays a Skemfar Avenger, draws through Guardian Project, and passes. Craft draws, and passes. Aiden draws, plays a Mana Vault, plays a Talisman of Hierarchy, draws through the Monarchy, and passes. Kalen draws and casts his commander, Lathril, Blade of the Elves, drawing through Guardian Project. He plays a Prismatic Vista. He plays an Elvish Mystic, drawing through Guardian Project. Kalen passes. Craft draws, and passes. At the end of Craft's turn, Aiden casts Fatal Push, targeting Skemfar Avenger. In response, Kalen cracks Prismatic Vista, paying a life and fetching up a forest onto the battlefield. He casts Autumn's Veil. In response, Craft casts Flusterstorm, countering Autumn's Veil. Skemfar is destroyed, and the turn moves to Aiden. Aiden draws and takes a damage from their Mana Vault. They cast a Dragon's Rage Channeler, draws through the Monarchy, and passes. Kalen draws and plays a Beast Whisperer, drawing through Guardian Project. He plays a Chrome Mox, imprinting Beast Within. He plays a Quirion Ranger, drawing through Beast Whisperer and Guardian Project. He plays a Wirewood Symbiote, drawing through Guardian Project and Beast Whisperer. He moves to combat and attacks Craft with Lathril. Craft takes the hit, and Kalen creates 2 Elf tokens. Kalen passes. Craft draws, prays for the game to end, and passes. Aiden draws and takes a damage through their Mana Vault. They move to combat, attacking Kalen for 3. Kalen takes the hit, Aiden draws through the Monarchy, and passes. Kalen draws and plays a Zuri, Renegade Leader, drawing through Beast Whisper and Guardian Project, and plays a Mox Diamond, discarding a land as it enters. He activates Quirion Ranger, bouncing a forest to his hand to untap Selvala. He floats mana with Selvala and activates Wirewood Symbiote, bouncing Quirion Ranger to untap Selvala and activates Azuri, giving all elves +3/+3 and trample. He recasts Quirion Ranger, drawing through Beast Whisper and Guardian Project, and activates Quirion Ranger, bouncing a forest to untap Selvala, activates Azuri, and plays the forest for turn. He moves to combat, attacking Aiden with the elf tokens, Beast Whisper, and Lathril. In response, Aiden casts Silence, surveilling through Channeler. In response, Kalen casts Abrupt Decay, destroying Craft's Soul Ring. Silence resolves, Aiden takes the hit and dies, and Kalen creates 8 elf tokens through Lathril. Kalen passes. Craft draws, plays a Talisman of Progress, and casts Swords to Plowshares, exiling Azuri and gaining Kalen 2 life. Despite this, with no counter magic in hand, Craft presents a loop of Kalen playing Cloudstone Curio, looping Wirewood Symbiote and Quirion Ranger, drawing his entire deck and netting infinite mana. With Elvish Warmaster in hand, the table sees the writing on the wall, and Kalen wins the game.
That game was awful. God, just like Pilch dying on turn 4, and then me having to spend all my resources to find a Wrath, and Craft just having like the one answer to like disrupt me winning the turn that I fragmentized his Mox Diamond really set me back.
It went really good. I saw an Obliterate from Pilch, and that was a big threat, so I killed him immediately. And then the other 2 people at the table really struggled after a Dam got cast and basically never got going, and I managed to get my draw engine going with Guardian Project and eventually kill them both with Azuri Renegade Leader.
I drew nothing and died.
The Obliterate line was bad. I had the win, and I tried to reroll the Obliterate so they would deal with Windgrace and then be tapped out, but no, they just killed me.
For this game, we have Kalen on Lathril Elfball, a tribal deck that seeks to spam elves and roll its way to victory. Jack on Keskit Kydele Hulkstaff, a Protean Hulk deck that seeks to cheat out Hulk, sacrifice it to Keskit, and win through a pile. Craft on Tivit Cellar of Sieves, an Esper deck that seeks to control the board, land its commander, accrue value, and win with Time Sieve. And finally, Evan on Rafiq Infect, a Voltron deck that seeks to use its commander combined with combat tricks to kill its opponents through Infect. Craft draws and plays an Underground River. He casts a Mana Crypt and a Wishclaw Talisman. Craft passes. Evan draws and plays a Mana Confluent. He plays a Mana Crypt of his own, a Llanowar Elves, and passes. Kalen draws and plays a Forest. He plays a Findhorn Elves and passes. Jack draws and plays a Bloodstained Mire, cracking it, paying a life, and fetching up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. He casts a Mox Diamond, discarding a land as it enters. He casts a Dark Ritual, a Felwar Stone, and his commander, Keskit, the Flesh Sculptor. Jack passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Craft loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws, plays a Polluted Delta, and passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Evan wins his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws, plays a Command Beacon, plays an Arcane Signet, and casts his commander, Rafiq of the Many. Evan passes. Kalen draws and plays an Overgrown Tomb tapped. He plays a Fauna Shaman and passes. Jack draws, plays a Morphic Pool, and casts his other commander, Kydele, chosen of Crewfix. At the end of Jack's turn, Craft cracks his Polluted Delta, paying a life and fetching up a Watery Grave onto the battlefield tapped. The turn moves to Craft. At the beginning of his upkeep, Craft loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws, plays an Exotic Orchard, plays a Dark Ritual, and casts his commander, Tivit, Seller of Secrets. It enters, Craft chooses Bribery and Evidence, and the pod chooses Evidence, with Craft creating a treasure token and 4 clue tokens. He cracks a clue token, drawing a card, and passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Evan wins his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws and moves to combat, attacking Craft with Rafiq. Craft declares no blocks, and in response, Evan casts Invigorate, targeting Rafiq. In response, Craft pays a life and exiles a blue card from his hand to cast Force of Will, countering Invigorate. Still before damage, Evan pays 2 life to cast Mutagenic Growth, giving Rafiq +2/+2. Craft takes the hit, and Evan passes. Kalen draws, plays a Forest, and casts his commander, Lathril, Blade of the Elves. Kalen passes. Jack draws and puts a Breeding Pool into play untapped, paying 2 life. He floats mana and activates Keskit, sacrificing Mox Diamond, Kydele, and Felwar Stone. He looks at the top 3, puts 2 into his hand, and the rest into his graveyard. He casts an Arcane Signet and a Talisman of Dominance, and passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Craft loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws, plays a Verdant Catacombs, and moves to combat, attacking Jack with Tivit. Jack takes the hit, Craft votes for Bribery twice, and the pod votes Evidence, with Craft creating 2 treasure tokens and 3 clue tokens. He casts Toxic Deluge, paying 3 life. In response, Evan casts Swan Song, countering Deluge and giving Craft a 2/2 bird. Craft cracks Verdant Catacombs, paying a life, and fetching up a Scrubland onto the battlefield. He activates Wishclaw Talisman, fetching up a card into his hand and giving Wishclaw to Jack. He casts Time Seed. With the table having no response, Craft presents a loop of attacking with Tivit, creating 5 artifacts, and sacrificing them all to Time Seed. With death from Tivit all but certain, the table sees the writing on the wall, and Craft wins the game. For those of you in the Ames area who stuck around, come to Mayhem Comics in Ames this week and ask for the YouTube discount. You'll be asked the question, who won Game 1? Answer correctly and get 10% off your purchase.
It went really poorly. I had to mulligan a little bit. I had to stay on 6 cards. Had a kind of slow start with just the Findhorn Elves and a land and a Fauna Shaman with no creatures to pitch to it. I played my Lathril turn 3 and then I died. So it really wasn't very strong game for Lathril, but we'll get the next game, I promise.
The deck worked as intended, and turns out Voltron is not good in CDH.
Well, I mean, I did all the things. I landed Rafiq early, I played the combat tricks, but a little bit too little too late.
All right, so after those games, we have Harmless Offering still pulling ahead at 130 points. But with Kalen's win, Fish Feeders is breaking away from the pack in solid second with 80 points. Cringe Copters and Viva la Revolucion need to start pulling some big plays as they're tied for last at 60 points. Is Harmless Offerings going for a blowout, or will another team be able to claw back up? Tune in next week to find out on the CEDH Summer Slam.